Welcome back to your safe place, kids. Let's jump right into today's story time, which is entitled, My Ex-Girlfriend Tried to Take Her Own Life in Front of Me, and it haunts me to this day. In 2017, I was with a woman who I thought I would be with for the rest of my life. We had great chemistry, we laughed a lot, and generally got on well together. However, a few years into our relationship, something drastically changed. The woman I loved became very emotional, depressed, and angry. Let's call her Sophie for the sake of this story. I tried to help Sophie by talking to her friends and family, but Sophie refused all forms of help and insisted she would be okay. Sophie also insisted it had nothing to do with our relationship, but she couldn't open up to me about the real issues. During this time, Sophie also became violent. Up until this point, it was only directed at me. I felt very sympathetic toward her because of her mental state and did not hold her personally responsible, as I loved this woman and believed she just needed help. It's unhealthy on my part, I know. Sophie would break my things, throw things at me, punch me, scratch the flesh off me, and bite me. Fast forward to a month or so later. I had still been pleading with Sophie's family and friends for help, and her family's response irritated me the most. It was as if they did not take what I was telling them about her mental state seriously. Sophie's friends were worried and tried to talk to her, but she always lied to them about the situation and ended up convincing some of her friends that I was a liar and not being truthful about her mental health and aggression. Around this time, her sister came to stay with her. Sophie was adopted out to her biological aunt when she was a child and raised by her aunt and uncle, whom she referred to as Mom and Dad. The sister that came to stay with her was her biological sister and was raised by her biological parents who had adopted her out. Things are not going well at first, and then I noticed every night these two were going out drinking. I thought this was okay, as Sophie had not seen her sister for a year or so, and they obviously had some catching up to do. One night, they returned home, and an argument broke out between Sophie and her sister. They were both in the spare room where Sophie's sister was sleeping while she was staying at the house. I had been woken up by this and listened intently. Due to Sophie's violent outburst, I was on standby in case things went that way. I was hoping like hell that wouldn't be the case, and then I heard the sister yell something, followed by a large crash and shouting, to which I rushed in there, and Sophie was on top of her sister, pummeling her face in. I pulled them apart and was yelling at the both of them and asking what happened. Sophie's sister was bleeding, and they both hugged each other and tried to convince me they would talk it out and not fight anymore. You have to understand that Sophie comes from a family where alcoholism and violence was the norm. So to her sister, a fistfight was not something that would cause her to leave or back out of a discussion with Sophie. I leave them there for 5 minutes, check on them, and everything seems fine. 5 minutes later, I hear a scream, followed by put the fucking knife down. Hearing this, I sprint to the room to see Sophie holding a knife in her hand, visibly shaking. Thinking she has only just grabbed the knife, I take it out of her hands and put it back in the knife holder in the kitchen. That's when I hear her sister screaming for me. I rush back into the room and can see blood streaming onto the floor. Sophie was wearing a long-sleeved shirt and the blood was flowing out of the wrist area onto the floor. I checked her wrist, nothing. Sophie nearly passed out and I caught her as she fell. Once I laid her down, I was frantically checking under her shirt for any wounds. That's when I noticed blood around her left shoulder. I lifted up her top and that's when I saw it. A clean stab wound about half an inch across in the side of her neck. It was bleeding badly, and I quickly grabbed a nearby towel and immediately started applying pressure whilst calling the police with the other hand and putting them on speaker. This entire time, the sister was freaking out and was in no state of mind to help me. Now, this is the part that scared me and haunts me the most. While I was holding the towel tight over the wound on the side of her neck, Sophie became conscious again. She then saw I was trying to stop the bleeding and immediately tried forcing my hand away that was holding the towel. I was pleading with her to stop, telling her she'll be okay and I love her. Sophie continued to resist and begged me to let her die. In that moment, I felt such heartache, I honestly can't explain it. Worse than any pain in my heart I felt before. Once the paramedics came, they assisted and told me she would be okay because I had done a great job at slowing down the bleeding. Turns out she had hit a major vein in her neck and was not far off from hitting something more vital. At the hospital, the truth came out, and it was concluded that the reason Sophie had done this was because during the argument, her sister had said her real parents don't love her in an effort to spite her. This was the reason Sophie beat her ass and ultimately decided to stab herself in front of her sister. I cannot imagine what that statement made her feel on top of everything else she was already dealing with. Whilst the situation was traumatic, it also had an upside to it. The mental health unit at the hospital finally took Sophie seriously. I live in a country where it's very hard to get publicly funded therapy unless you have made an attempt on your life. And it's sad, but it's true. That's how things work. Things are better in the country now, but even a few years ago it was much more difficult. Sophie was sent to a respite care of sorts where they care for them 24/7. The people there are essentially on suicide watch, medication to help with depression, etc., and also get to go outdoors to events, etc., with their group in order to try and help their situation with socialization, bonding with others, etc. Again, through this program, Sophie entered regular counseling sessions and was able to work through some of her problems. All of this took a toll on our relationship. After the program Sophie went into, she moved back home. The violence stopped for a while, but started again. It was at that point I decided to end the relationship for my own betterment. It would turn out that I too would be diagnosed with clinical depression less than 1 year after breaking up with her. I blame myself for Sophie doing what she did for a long time, as I thought I could have helped her sooner. My doctor believes, based on my explanations, that my depression most likely started shortly after the events, and worsened when Sophie had remained violent to me, even after sticking by her side through all of it. It made me feel worthless, like a failure of a partner. It was only through my own counseling that I was able to realize that this wasn't my fault. I tried to help Sophie in the best ways I knew how. I stayed even after she had been violent to me. I hoped for change and progress. I do not blame Sophie for any of this. For the violence, yes, I do believe she must take responsibility for that, as it's far from acceptable, but I do not blame her for what I had to deal with because of her attempt on her life. I still feel sorry for her, as she has a very rough upbringing and was dealing with horrible things I never had to experience growing up. Sometimes, though, the memory comes back. Her on the floor, the blood, me yelling at her that I love her and to stop pushing my hand away from her neck. It's become easier with time, but I don't think I'll ever forget it, and it's changed my perspective on life forever. Life is fragile. Live it while you can. What a wonderful impact statement to finish off that story, man. OP got to stare into the abyss and came back wiser for it. I'm very glad to hear OP has taken stock of themselves and found out they have some issues of their own which need to be handled with the help of professionals. Can only hope that they continue to work on things appropriately and eventually a full recovery is possible. If not, getting as close to completion as possible, with the mental scars only needing the occasional upkeep. Hopefully, the ex-girlfriend does well in life too, but it seems she has far more work to do, as having a rough upbringing is no excuse to perpetrate the things she does on other people, especially those who were closest to her. As for the self-deletion attempt, to be honest, I mean, as far as reasons go to do some craziness like that, it was a pretty good one. Meaning, that's like the type of excuse you'd expect someone to have, not that it mitigates what she did or makes it the right choice whatsoever. With all that said and done, I'll leave the link to OP's post in the description. Go show them some love and support, even if only for having the stones to share their story with the world. I'm proud of them, and you should be too. If y'all enjoyed story time with Safe today, hit those like and sub buttons to make this your safe place, and I'll catch you in the next one.